this Michael Creedon here from...
They're just coming over now.
They're coming over now. And let's not forget the 112 million we got for the pipeline. All those years, yeah, that's gone, I know.
That's fine, but I mean, I just need to look forward and
Yep.
have them there.
Councillors, there's a couple more people to attend, external parties. They're on their way. Yeah, I think so.
Get out now.
Councillors, I'll declare the meeting open, and first of all, can I begin by recognising the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Jarawar and Gibel people, the Western Waka Waka people, and also the people from the western area, the Bigambul people. And can I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, the rich traditions and the bold ambitions of Australia's first people. Can I also recognise that this meeting is open to the public and it will also be live streamed. And I thank those, our staff who are here to support us today, and also each and every one of you for being here. Can I take this moment to recognise the partner of Minter Ellison, Michael Creedon, Claire Turner, a special counsel with Minter Ellison, and Gavin O'Donovan, Technical Director, Strategic Finance, AEC Group. Councillors, is there anybody who wishes to apply for leave of absence in these circumstances down the track a little? Nobody? Anybody who would have wishes to declare prescribed COI? If not, we'll move to the early briefing. If we are to deal with attachments 3 to 8, that will be done in a confidential session. But to start the meeting off, I'll hand over to Jake to begin proceedings.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good afternoon, councillors. I wish to present a report today relating to the Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline. The purpose of today's report is to provide a recommendation to Council on whether to support the connection of the proposed Toowoomba Warwick pipeline project being administered by the Department of Regional Development, Manufacturing and Water to the Toowoomba's bulk water supply network. The executive summary is a special meeting held by this council on the 26th of October 2022 to make a decision on council support for the proposed project. The project was being administered by the department, and that report is included in attachment 1. At that special meeting, it was resolved that the matter be deferred to a further special meeting of council, pending urgent discussions with the State Government Minister as a result of a relevant decision that was made by Southern Downs Regional Council today, that if accepted by the state, does not achieve the following principles in relation to the project. These principles are: the project must not adversely impact or worsen Toowoomba Regional Council's water security position. There must be no adverse financial impacts on Toowoomba Regional Council as a result of the project, and that all parties to the transaction achieve an equal financial benefit. Southern Downs Regional Council also met to discuss the project on the 26th of October and resolved to provide in-principle support for the project with 10 conditions, referring to attachment 9 in the report. These conditions conflicted with the resolution recommended for adoption by Council. As a result of subsequent discussions between the Minister of DRDMW, Council and SDRC, SDRC's resolution was amended and adopted by Southern Downs Regional Council at its ordinary meeting on the 9th of November 2022. The amended resolution, as was adopted by Southern Downs Regional Council, is included as attachment 10 to this report. The amended resolution, as adopted by SDRC, now complements the recommendations of this report. Further consultation will be required between Council, Southern Downs Regional Council, Seqwater and the Department once all parties have agreed to proceed with the project, and this is to ensure that conditions included in Council's recommendations are satisfied. The recommendation that sits in front of Council today is that the State Government and Southern Downs Regional Council be advised that Toowoomba Regional Council's support for and participation in the Toowoomba to Warwick Pipeline project is conditional on formal agreements acceptable to Toowoomba Regional Council being entered into with the relevant parties to achieve all of the following: augmentation and relocation of the Wivenhoe Pump Station, an optimised Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline, as option 3 indicated, a larger pipeline around Toowoomba to facilitate a southern water treatment plant near Westbrook, and around Toowoomba to facilitate, a Greenmount water treatment plant connected to Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline with future treated water pipelines to also supply Cambodia, Greenmount, Nobby and Clifton in lieu of 4 individual water treatment plants as recommended by the state. Toowoomba Regional Council to only supply water to Southern Downs Regional Council at times that Toowoomba Regional Council has sufficient capacity within its network, i.e. there is no need to bring forward the procurement of any water-related infrastructure. The project must not adversely impact or worsen Toowoomba Regional Council's water security position. There must be no adverse financial impacts on Toowoomba Regional Council as a result of the project. The commercially acceptable funding arrangements, capital cost recovery, access charges and contractual arrangements are to be negotiated and agreed between the State Government, SEQ Water, Southern Downs Regional Council and Toowoomba Regional Council. The allocation of water loss, risk and associated costs for relevant sections of the pipeline are to be negotiated and agreed between Seqwater, Southern Downs Regional Council and Toowoomba Regional Council on the basis of which party the water is being transported for and which party is responsible for maintaining the pipeline. The pipeline alignment, construction and road corridor impacts, including reinstatement requirements, be agreed between all parties through the development and finalisation of interface deeds at least 3 months prior to any construction works commencing. And finally, the State Government remain responsible for access to the regulatory aspects of the project. The reason for this recommendation, councillors, is that to ensure the delivery of the trunk infrastructure is efficient and cost-effective and aligns with the future growth intentions of the Toowoomba region. It also ensures that the proposed Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline does not adversely affect water security for the Toowoomba region or place unnecessary impost on the Toowoomba Regional Council ratepayer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jake. Jake, the financial contribution by the State Government in respect to Toowoomba Regional Council in this particular aspect, how much money is that involved?
So, with the offer that is on the table from the state at the moment, Mr. Mayor, the supply to the southern regional towns is $15 million. Supply or the contribution by the state to upgrade and relocate the Wivenhoe pump station at $26 million, and fixed charges that are anticipated to be recovered from Southern Downs Regional Council as a payment for access to our network at $4 million over 10 years. So in the first 10 years, it'll be a total benefit to Toowoomba Regional Council of $45 million.
Thanks, Jake. Are there any questions? Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Mayor. Through you, I note that the report talks about how we made our decision at the last meeting because a motion that was supported by SDRC was incompatible with our position, and that they've gone back and redone that motion, and that now the wording in the report is that it complements our position. And I need that explained, because I look at this and it's basically the same. The difference that I can see is that, no, it's not. It's not.
It's the same.
The attachments aren't confidential. The resolutions of Southern Downs Regional Council are.
Done an open meeting.
So the one that is different is item number 2, and the intent though seems to be the same to me. So can you talk me through that, please, Jake? How is that different? The old resolution with the new resolution?
Thank you, Councillor, through to Mr Mayor. Item number 2 in the old resolution made mention that Southern Downs Regional Council would not be requiring bring forward costs by Toowoomba Regional Council. This implied that Southern Downs would be having an impact on TRC's capital program. The new resolution, or new dot point 2, accepts that Toowoomba Regional Council will not bring forward any capital upgrades to facilitate the project, and the pipeline will be operated subject to capacity constraints of Toowoomba Regional Council. So it's very clear that Southern Downs will not be impacting on A, TRC's capital program, and B, only taking water when TRC's network has capacity to provide. There's also been some modifications to item number 10, which ensures that, and it's a single word, in the old resolution there was mention that council would be, restriction levels were to meet or exceed TRC's restrictions, whereas now they are to meet or be more severe than Toowoomba Regional Council's water restrictions. So this ensures that in previous instances there were concerns raised by this council that water restrictions at Southern Downs may be at a less severe measure than what TRC is, and with item number 10 this ensures that Southern Downs Regional Council will meet or be harsher or severe is the term than what's currently with Toowoomba Regional Council.
So item number 2 then, in the first instance, seems inappropriate in that it was one local government area, almost setting another local government area on a capital works path, or restricting them from going down a capital works path, whereas the updated version, thank you for your answer too, Jake, the updated version is that Southern Downs accepts that council at Toowoomba Regional Council will do what Toowoomba Regional Council wants to do. I don't see that the updated resolution from Southern Downs is like a panacea that changes everything. I don't see that, but be curious to hear what my colleagues have to say.
Thank you. Councillor Nancy Sommerfield.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jake, for your comments. I too noticed that the statement about the SDRC motion complementing ours, and I really struggle to see how it does. I note the amendments you're talking about, but if you look at the overall 10 points in their motion compared to our, what have we got, 10 as well, Theirs is quite directly, quite clearly stating to the state government and to our council exactly what they want. They are standing proud, representing their ratepayers, telling us and the state government exactly what their expectations are, whereas for me, our recommendation is all about negotiation. And sure, we all want to negotiate and we all want to play nicely in the sandpit, but at the end of the day, we also need to be standing up for our ratepayers. And I don't feel that we're necessarily doing that, and that's my view alone. I have concerns about the word adversely. Adversely isn't clear. We're not saying the project must not impact or worsen Toowoomba Regional Council's water security, and it doesn't say there must be no financial impacts to Toowoomba Regional Council as a result of the project. Adversely dilutes it. It means that there can be impacts. So I believe the word adversely should be removed on both of those. If you look at item 3, a Greenmount water treatment plant connected to the Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline with future treated water pipelines to also supply Cambodia, Nobby and Clifton in lieu of the 4 individual water treatment plants. So what does that mean? And this is what I'm getting at. I'm not asking you the question. What I'm getting at is we've got too much dilution and not enough clarity and direction. Does that mean that the future treated water pipelines will be built at council's expense because they're for our towns? And these amounts of money, the $15 million for the towns and the $26 million for Wivenhoe, does that cover all the costs? And if it doesn't, who's going to foot that bill? Will it be us? Will it be our ratepayers? You know, quite clearly, the Southern Downs Regional Council, and I think we've all heard that the state government helped them write it, they're quite clear. Council not being required to pay for any fixed cost of water provided. The community service obligation applied to the pipeline, reviewed to cover all their costs. The annual fixed operation and maintenance, $560,000 per annum. They want a grant. They're quite clearly stating exactly what they want. They're not saying we want to negotiate an outcome. They're saying this is the line in the sand and this is what we want. And for me personally, I believe that's what we should be doing as well. Otherwise, we're not doing the right thing by our ratepayers.
Councillor McMahon.
Chair, thanks. Look, I have to say that my initial thoughts were quite in line with Councillor Vonhoff's. We have the Southern Downs initial motion and the revised Southern Downs motion. And I remember when the first one was brought to us, we were in the last meeting, and we were running, what's going on here? And it's going to go away and come back as slightly something more in line with what we're doing. But when one sits down and juxtaposes the two motions, I don't see a real lot of difference between the old one to the new. There was some wording changes, but the 10 points and the overall intent, I feel, are still quite the same. I wonder if perhaps Jake could talk me through, in the initial motion, number 7 from Southern Downs was something I would need to talk through, the one about the extra 5 megalitres per day, and then it's still in the second one with a few wording changes around it. But if they're seeking an extra 5 megalitres from day from SEC water, subject to items 2 and 6 for us when the pipeline becomes operational, SEC water still comes from us, right? So can you just talk through to me how that ask of theirs for 5 megs a day extra is going to not affect our water supply and our...
So that item, Councillor, is in relation to the agreement that they will need to have with SEC Water, similar to the agreement that we have with SEC Water around access to water from Wivenhoe. Our agreement is for 10,000 megalitres per annum with an opportunity to extend that at Council's discretion. What Southern Downs Regional Council, again, I'm proposing, I was supposing, I wasn't in the chamber when they made that decision, in conversation with their respective general manager, was about ensuring that the contract that they signed, or the initial contract that they signed with SEQ Water, had that capacity in it. Understanding that there are some limitations within our network, which is the reference to items 2 and 6, about bringing that water through our network. So in order to supply Southern Downs Regional Council with the water that they may be required, when our network has capacity, they may need to take a little more than a daily average amount. They'll need to, in order to balance it up. So that's where that 5 megalitres per day comes from, is to say to SEC Water, we want the contract with you, must have at least 5 megs per day, subject to TRC's ability to move that water through their network.
Okay, that explains it. Yeah, thanks. I'll leave it for now, Chair. Thanks.
It may be appropriate now, for Michael, from a legal perspective, if you were to just give us an understanding of how you see the difference in the two agreements from a legal perspective.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. I guess just a couple of observations to start with, and I appreciate the observation that's been made that they look substantially similar in terms of the Southern Downs motions or resolutions that have been put forward, and I think that's true. But I think the significant point is that there are differences, and they may be subtle, but I think the words and the changes are significant. And they do alter the meaning of the resolution. So in my mind at least, I don't think it's right to say that they are the same, because they're not. A couple of examples of that, I think, go to condition number 2. And I think the significant difference there is obviously the further words that have been added to that, which would significantly, I think, clarify, and I should say, I think the concerns that perhaps council had in relation to the first resolution was that not all parts of it, but certainly some parts of it would seem to be in conflict with the resolution that council was considering at that point in time. So, for example, a significant one is that Southern Downs having sole responsibility for determining when to request water via the pipeline. That was a significant conflict, I think, with certainly how Toowoomba Council saw the operation of the pipeline. That has been significantly changed by only the addition of a few words, and that is that they've added that it's subject to point 2 above. Okay, and point 2 above is that the pipeline will be operated subject to capacity constraints of Toowoomba Regional Council's infrastructure and will not negatively impact Toowoomba's water security. So I think that is fairly significant. That's a fairly substantial difference in meaning. A couple of comments in regard to, I think, the addition of the words adversely impacted, and just a couple of thoughts on that. I think, for example, the use of that in the context of adversely. I think it might have been your motions. Yeah, sorry, in your resolutions. And so I understand the point taken that the resolution presently said there must be no adverse financial impacts on Toowoomba Regional Council as a result of the project. I'd probably read that to be on balance. On balance, there is no adverse financial impact, because there may be a need, obviously, as part of the program, to expend some money on areas that council were originally intending to spend money. But I think I don't see any concern with the word adverse. I think it simply means that there are clearly going to be financial impacts. Some of those are going to be beneficial, I would have thought, on balance to council. And what we're saying is we're trying to safeguard that by saying that we will ensure that there won't be any, on balance, adverse consequences to Toowoomba's Regional Council to the financial impacts on the council. Again, and finally, in relation to, I think, resolution number 7 from Southern Downs, again, the wording is very similar, but of course the addition there is of the words, council seeking the initial provision of up to 5 megalitres per day from SEQ water, brackets, and the addition is subject to the matters in item 2 and 6. So again, that's reinforcing the point that can't be, it's got to be subject to capacity constraints that Toowoomba Regional Council's infrastructure has, and it won't negatively impact Toowoomba's water security. So I think they're the points I can make now.
Are there any further questions for Councillor Von Hoff? You have a question? Oh. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Mayor. Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. Well, while you're there, and perhaps it's through you to Mayor, to the operational team as well, to Damien or Jake, when we use the words adverse effect, or we use the words subject to capacity, who actually judges what that is? Or is that part of an agreement that follows this motion?
In relation to the operational side, there are defined limits to how much water we can fit through the Crestbrook pipeline. It's 44.1 megalitres per day. That's the limit. We can't get any more. However, there is a project included in Water Vision that would see that capacity increase. So as Toowoomba, as that project comes or becomes real, and is that upgrade is required to facilitate our own needs to supply water to our own community, the capacity will change. So rather than putting a fixed capacity in the resolution, the idea is to ensure that there are no adverse impacts and that we only have the capacity. When we have the capacity, we can give it to SDRC. Otherwise, we'd be moving back to resolutions on a frequent basis as upgrades occur throughout our network. As far as the financial implications, that discussion is going to be made through an agreement and a legal document that will be reviewed by our team in finance to understand and make sure that, as Gavin has said in the last meeting, that the financial components that SDRC is basically paying for the capacity that they use when and if they use it. And so that'll be reviewed on a more frequent basis through an agreement between SDRC and TRC to ensure that those costs are recovered appropriately based on SDRC's utilisation, whether that be 1 in 10 years, 1 in 12 years, 1 in 15 years, 1 in 50 years, or in fact 1 in 6 years, depending on how their community and climate evolves over that period of time.
Councillor Jeff, just to add to that, in relation to who determines exactly how much capacity there is on any day, it will be with the manager of water operations and or escalated to the general manager. And in terms of adverse, any financial implications, it would be very similar. So, for example, if Wivenhoe was off, there's 0. If we're using all the water through Crestbrook for our own population, there is 0.
Councillor McDonald. Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Mayor, through you. I've got 2, but just to pick up on something that the General Manager just mentioned. So how is that scenario that you just discussed, Damien, about when the pump at Wivenhoe isn't on and they would get 0, how is that consistent with number 7 in the Warwick resolution that 5 megs a day be provided during a drought year?
Because it's subject to item number 2, which says Toowoomba Regional Council determines its capacity to put water through the network from Wivenhoe.
Yeah, so through you, Chair, my question to Michael on point 2 is along the same lines that Councillor McDonald raised about the idea of who actually determines the capacity constraint, what the capacity constraints are, and if there is capacity on any particular day. And I think of what is written in our resolutions and in Southern Downs resolutions, and it's been the thing that I've said right from the get-go with this, which is our pipes are only set, they are set in their size. The pump is set in its size and its capacity is set. So what we are not using in the pumps and the pipes, that's our economic security as well for the region, because people know that we're not at capacity and let's invest in Toowoomba region because we know that it is a secure water situation. And can we talk through the words capacity constraints? That to me sounds like we max this out until our pipes and our pumps can't do any more. So if we're sitting at 95% and they're asking for a further 5, well, we can do that. Is my reading of that correct, Michael?
Obviously, it sounds like more of a technical question, but I will make the following comments. I think from my basic engineering knowledge that the capacity of the pipelines are designed for a maximum capacity. That is designed around those peak periods when Toowoomba needs to utilise the full capacity of the pipeline. At all other times, there is free capacity in the pipeline. Okay. The second observation is I'm guessing the way that this the way that this presently works is that, assuming there was no further upgrades made to the current pipelines and other infrastructure, then presumably the maximum operation of the current infrastructure would start to need to be operated for a greater period of time. So at 100% capacity, which would then, during those periods, offer no entitlement to Warwick to have any water, because there is no free capacity in the system to provide Warwick with water. But I would assume that at some point in the future, purely for Toowoomba's purposes, there will need to be further capacity added to pinch points along the pipeline in order to cater for those those limited periods during summer when you need the maximum capacity of the system.
Yep. And my other question, Mayor, through you to Michael, is reading what we have and what Southern Downs has. And if we were to cast our minds forward, it's really easy at the moment because our dams are full. Happy days. But that is the exception, not the norm. And if we cast our minds forward to a day in the future where drought has really bitten us, and it's reasonable to expect it will be biting Southern Downs as well, because we are not that far away. And reading what we've got here and there, and Southern Downs is asking for water because they're running dry, and we've got capacity in our system, but it's a real push. I just can't see practically one local government saying to another local government when there's a pipe connecting us, no Southern Downs, not today. What assurance do you have for me that what is written into Toowoomba Regional Council's motion would negate that from happening?
Well, thank you. Again, probably 2 points to make on that is, number one, I can't, it's probably not so much what is in here that would negate that happening or stop that happening. These are simply resolutions which are ultimately going to be used as principles for the drafting of the agreements between the parties, which are going to be substantial agreements, which are going to deal with sort of all of those types of scenarios, I'm sure. This is, I guess, they'll be drafted on these principles, that the intent is that Toowoomba won't be put in a position where it would need to do that. So yes, it can be done, and that would be the principles on which the drafting would be put together, that would protect Toowoomba's interest in that. Now that's from a legal perspective. I sense the real answer whenever something like that came to pass would be more of a political issue that would need to be resolved.
Councillor Carl, you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Mine is in fact very, well, probably along those lines. And Jake, you described to us the variability on parameters as our network grows and those trigger points at which, you know, they'll vary into the future to avoid us drafting resolutions. But doesn't this set us up for a degree of risk? Over and above, Damien, operational matters where a GM makes a determination, this will ultimately, as our legal advice has just stated, become a political issue. Let me cite some cases. Second range crossing, political issue. It never stacked up commercially. There are others, but I give you an example of political pressure. I'm not altogether comfortable with exposing our community to political intervention in the future and an overarching state intervention in this contractual arrangement of which the state has an ability to override in times of need. I'm not sure, and further to Councillor Rebecca's inquiry about capacity, I think our potential for capacity in the network is somewhat eroded with that political intervention over and above contractual arrangements. So I'm not comfortable that this is risk-proof at all, just because it's a contract. I don't know what answer, you know, how you answer that, but these are some of the things that I'm trying to flesh out in my mind, and I do think we're exposed to a degree of risk outside of a contractual arrangement, over and above. I'm just not comfortable, sorry.
Would you like to answer that, Michael, or Jake, or Damien?
I'll just make an overarching comment. Councillors, two things. Firstly, it's in times of drought, conversely, which is when we will have capacity in the pump sets. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that is the way the modelling works. Secondly, the way these resolutions or proposed recommended resolutions by management is that it is eyes wide open by Southern Downs and by Toowoomba that we will have right of veto according to our operating requirements. And that will dictate to Southern Downs what I would refer to as their operating model. What our first best preference was during the Millennium Drought 2.0 that we've just survived. We only survived that because of the Wivenhoe asset. Had we not had that Wivenhoe asset, Toowoomba would have been in dire straits in mid-2021. Now, the reason we turned that pump set on the 1st of April 2019 allowed the dams, they will continue to evaporate, but nice round even numbers. Toby, I'm looking at you, I think it was 1% a month, thereabouts. And our operating model was to leave as much water in our 3 dams, not push our bores too hard, and bring everything up from Wivenhoe as soon as we could get that kit working. That was a substantial change from the response by this business during the Millennium Drought 1.0, which was progressively bring all of the dams down, roughly at the same level, not keep any dams in reserve in case of asset failures, and aim for the best blended water quality. We have different water qualities between and amongst our 3 vessels of water. Kubi is the least favourable water, followed closely, well, a fair distance from Perseverance is our second least favourite, but Crestbrook is our favourite. It is a lovely dam. And that water that comes up from Wivenhoe is just as good as the Crestbrook. So by resolution, or suggested resolution 2, that is, we determine the capacity, we are dictating to Southern Downs their operating model. That is, don't rely on this as last resort water and try and bring it in through all summer. Try and bring it through during the cooler months so that they maintain their reserves in Leslie Dam and or Storm King ultimately when they connect Warwick to Stanthorpe. Does that help councillors understand that?
Oh yeah, welcome. I've tried to only ask little bursts of questions and give my colleagues an opportunity to. Thank you for that, General Manager, about the situation with Wivenhoe, and it is certainly the case when we look at our dam levels. Activating the Wivenhoe pump basically allows us to stabilise. It goes down incrementally, but it's a my goodness, we would be, I can't imagine what situation we'd be in without that. So that is definitely the case. I actually wanted to go back to something that Councillor Summerfield raised before, and it is that the state government helped Southern Downs Regional Council redo their motion. Is that the case? And that's the first question, is that the case? And if that is the case, it seems extraordinary to me that a state government would help a local government write a motion. Can we get some comment on that?
If I may, Mr Mayor, it wasn't just the state government, there was some assistance provided by officers in this room to ensure that the recommendation or the concerns that were raised during our special meeting were addressed in the Southern Downs. But at the end of the day, Southern Downs still, the motion was put to Southern Downs as any motion would be put towards this chamber, and that chamber elected or voted to unanimously accept that resolution.
Okay, then that makes me ask questions about why not only the state but Toowoomba Regional Council officers would be involved in another local government area's motion. Our jobs as councillors is to serve the residents of our local government area, and our declaration of office is to our residents. We have to think about, we want to be neighbourly, but we have to think about our residents. Brian, CEO, what's the situation, please?
My understanding is the state helped facilitate both organisations and through their department an agreement that would be suitable and acceptable to both parties, or 3 parties, basically the state, Southern Downs and Toowoomba Regional Council. They were aware of what we were proposing and we'd been substantial discussions with them. They were aware of what our recommendations were. They were aware of what Southern Downs were, and they saw that they didn't align. So what they did was consult with both councils, saying this, if we work our way through this process, this would align with what you guys want to do, this would align with what you guys want to do. Is that acceptable for the purposes of the negotiations to this point in time? The ultimate decision, though, is up to Southern Downs Regional Council and Toowoomba Regional Council as to whether they find those conditions that the officers have negotiated to be what we would expect a reasonable set of conditions that would allow us to operate within our own operating environment and comply with those principles that council set down at the initial, right back when the negotiations worked, about no adverse impact to our financial situation and our water security. This agreement as proposed achieves that from our perspective. There are other conditions that the state negotiated with Southern Downs Regional Council to make it palatable for them. There are also conditions that they negotiated with us to make it palatable for us, including, as we've talked about before, the pump and the contribution towards the water treatment for single water treatment facilities. Or if we wish to, we could apply that to the 4 separate facilities, but they just basically gave us an allocation to deal with that. So the process was worked through. Ultimately, the decisions come back to Southern Downs Regional Council, who believe that they've negotiated something that is satisfactory for them, and they've set out what their conditions are. The conditions that we've said we're willing to, or recommended that councils consider, do meet those principles that were set down by council originally. So if it's up to council to determine whether, from your perspective and your considerations, is that acceptable to this council?
So we are here today to make decisions because we are the decision-making forum for this council. So I'll leave it after this, Mayor, but your words, CEO, that the state sat down with us and hashed out, does this align with what you want to do? We are the ones who decide what we want to do, and it hadn't been to council yet. So the back story behind how we got here, I don't like what I've just heard.
Fair to say it's come from, as a recommendation from our staff after significant work. Yep.
We're the decision makers here.
Absolutely.
We are the decision makers here, and this is the time when we are deciding on our support or otherwise for this pipeline.
And I guess I'll say again, it's a recommendation from our staff as a result of consultation. And you will recall that at the previous meeting, I was very fortunate that I had my iPad here and that I got that email from my colleague Mayor, and that changed the whole tone of the meeting and gave us the opportunity to get some, I don't know what you'd call it, some corrections in terms of Southern Downs. Yeah. Now, I have a few more people who are wishing to speak. Any comments here in respect to any of the previous discussion? Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, followed by Councillor O'Shea.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I agree, Councillor Von Hoff, we do have to think about our residents, and when I hear that we're going to have a $45 million benefit and get the things that we were going to and wanted to do for our residents, I think, that weighs heavily for me. But I guess I wanted to know, I know that we've probably had this conversation, if this resolution isn't to be, the recommendation isn't to be passed today, what's the steps from there?
Through you, Mr Mayor. It is my understanding that the decision will, as Councillor Carl has suggested, be a political decision to be made by the state about the future of this project.
With possibly any of the work that we've done so far negated and we get what we're given?
That is always a possibility, Councillor.
Can I just simply say, in my discussions in recent times with not only the Minister when he was in town, but also with Bernadette Zerba, who's the Deputy Director General of that particular part of his department, she's very supportive of our position, and I think they were quite determined to modify the previous resolution from the Southern Downs Regional Council to align it more with our needs. That's the discussion I've had. Councillor O'Shea.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. First comment I just want to make, so just, look, I understand the point we're discussing at the moment around how or why or what steps went into producing this motion, and totally understand Councillor Von Hoff's point of view, but respectfully, I sort of saw it from a different way. I actually saw it that again, we're talking about, yes, we want the best outcome from our residents. There's a different council involved in it. This project impacts both, and I would have thought I actually felt more comfortable that there had been this sort of collaboration post what happened at our last meeting, because I would have hoped or would have assumed the message or in working with this through the state government and the Southern Downs Regional Council from our staff, whoever they may have been, came as a result of obviously the strong position that I think this council showed in opposition to what the initial proposal was from Southern Downs. So just that's just a different look at it. I actually feel more comfortable with the scenario knowing that sort of work has occurred. So just on that, my question, just if I can, probably to Michael, I suppose it'd be, was Councillor Carl sort of spoke before, and I thought it was a good issue around that. We're trying to make a decision that we see that puts us at the least amount of risk in terms of the position that we're in from a state government point of view, whatever it might be. But not to use a term we used in an earlier session, but would that or would that not be one of the known unknowns? So regardless of whatever decisions are made here, a political intervention at any level of this, and we often talk about we are a child of the state government and we're at the whim of that, at the end of the day, whatever we put forward, that doesn't really negate any form of risk or what would be at political intervention or a decision at another level. Whilst we want to put our best case, do you understand what I'm saying? I'm just trying to understand the head of power of this, where it actually lies. We want to put our best case forward as we see it for what we see as the best outcome for us. But in terms of us sitting here comfortably today, feeling like we've completely risk-proofed this to the best of our ability, at the end of the day, is that the reality?
I think the fact that if all of the parties enter into mutual agreements that are understood, and I think it's fairly clear all the parties are going in understanding these principles. I think certainly Toowoomba's made their principles, or would through this resolution, make it very clear what its position is in respect of water security and not having to provide water subject to capacity constraints, etc. So that can be reflected in those agreements. I think, having said that, I think certainly the state government, they have power to come in and do what they like, within means. But that is also probably at a political risk to it. It doesn't want to come in over the top and alter agreements that have been agreed between the parties. Usually, I would have thought the state government would much prefer the parties enter into an agreement that they can point to, and not sort of. It would be a better outcome for the state, I would have thought, rather than the state having to impose some solution on the parties.
Okay, thank you. If I may, Mayor, just in a follow to that, so I suppose the strongest position that we want to consider, where we want to put ourselves from a least risk position, is the determination of that word capacity. That be right? And that we've heard is who determines capacity. We're actually in the driver's seat in regards to that.
Through you, Mr Chair, that's correct, Councillor O'Shea, that the capacities are defined. We've made reference in agreements and will to the Water Vision documentation that define capacities within our network at certain times. As I said, capacity will change as we invest in our network, as we would normally to support growth within our region. So that term capacity will be defined in those agreements and linked to engineering standards, to calculations that outline a number. And that number, as I said, will change, but it will be a number, and it will be a number that is set by Toowoomba Regional Council, not by the state and not by Southern Downs Regional Council.
Thank you.
Councillor Shine. Oh, you finished, Councillor Shine?
Yeah, I am. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Shine.
Thanks, Mayor. I was interested to hear the comments about political intervention. The original Wivenhoe Dam pipeline to Pressbrook would not have occurred without political intervention. I have personal knowledge and to verify that. And so we've benefited from it, and I think we will continue to benefit from it in the future, notwithstanding that from a purely political point of view, investing $300 million in our two regions of this one plus Southern Downs would not give any political return based on the representations that we have. Looking at I think it's important to look at the bigger picture here, that the state government is investing $300 million in our respective regions, 45 of which will come to Toowoomba, as indicated earlier in the presentation. It will improve our water security and the distribution of that service. And the fact that, to my mind, that there have been discussions held between the officers of this council, Warwick and Southern Downs and the state government is particularly normal, sensible, and to be commended. And as a result of which, I think we've come up with a very workable and commendable agreement. I congratulate the officers who've partaken in that process.
If I can just comment on the very beginning of this, on that November night in 2019, during the middle of the fires, that was a political decision when Anthony Lynham rang me and told me that this was happening and that it would be in the paper tomorrow morning. Now, I had no understanding or knowledge of it prior to that. It was a decision that was made by Cabinet to secure the water for Southern Downs, and we didn't have any input at that stage. Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Mayor. This may cover off into financials, which could cause a problem in regard to going into confidential. It may or may not. The item number 5 in the Southern Downs motion, the annual fixed operations and maintenance costs for pipe when not in use. And I gather that's an access charge, the theory of an access charge, including 200,000, is reduced from a proposed 560,000 per annum initially in 2026, subject to through a grant from the state government. What does that actually mean as far as is reduced from the proposed? Does that mean that ideally they don't want to pay anything?
Jake.
What does that mean? And subsequently to that, from a financial modelling, given that our modelling was based on an access charge over a 10-year period for modelling, it may, Mayor, through you to the CEO, it may imply that we need to go in confidential, or may not, but question for Jake first in regard to what that actually means. Thanks.
My reading of that, council, would be similar to any motion that this council may make seeking support from the state government to assist in a financial, in a grant or subsidy that is requested from the state government. It's not necessarily, and implies in my mind that there's no impact on TRC's ability to leverage charges associated with the use of this pipeline. It just suggests that the state needs to assist SDRC through a grant for costs above an amount which they aren't able to or see an ability to provide from the support of their rate base. So that's my read of that, but happy to be corrected.
Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jake. Yeah, no, I'm referencing the Southern Downs one, but then I guess the next question rises in regard to our own modelling, and Gavin might be able to talk to it, but noting it is a confidential attachment in 7, in regard to the fixed access fee that we've modelled, and whether those confidential items have been shared at all to Southern Downs.
Southern Downs and the state have been made aware of the indicative charge based on their projected utilisation of the pipeline being 1 in 10 years. We've made it clear that that charge will change depending on how often, or in fact how little, that pipeline is used by Southern Downs Regional Council.
Carol Taylor, did you have a comment there before?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I did, and if we could just get back there to the matter that Councillor McDonald was talking about, it's just slipped off the screen. With that, for the
Item 5.
yes, 5. Thank you. Is reduced from the proposed 560,000 per annum. What's the 560,000 per annum? Is that our charge, or is that the state government's charge? Or number one, that's my first question. The second one is a grant. A grant is very, very rarely, and you're saying, through you, Mr Mayor, to Jake, you're saying that our charge will remain our charge, and anything that they apply for to help defray that has got nothing to do with us. Is that what you're saying? Because the 560, I mean, that is one area where if we're not clear on this, that could disadvantage our area, our people.
If I may, Mr Mayor.
Thank you.
Councillor Taylor, I'll answer your questions in reverse order in which they were asked. Number two is yes, absolutely. That it is, will not have any impact on what charge we wish to charge SDRC. What I can say in open session is that the amount that we wish to charge SDRC is less than that amount, but there's also going to be charges levied against SDRC for by SEQ Water for the use of the pipeline to transport water from those locations, as well as costs from SEQ Water in the operation and maintenance of the pipeline. So, without speaking for my colleagues in SDRC, I think they're through that motion expecting to limit their exposure and expecting that the state will assist with anything above that amount.
So, through you, Mr Mayor, to Jake, that my concerns were, and I was thinking about this yesterday, that regardless of what our charges are, we don't need to worry, because our charge is our charge, that's it. So thank you very much, you've given me great confidence there.
Gavin, I note that you're taking considerable interest in it, and do you have any comments that you wish to make that's your space in which you work at AEC?
I will just say that what Jake has said is true and correct, so there will be no financial impact on Wollongong.
Thank you.
That's a negotiation between the two other parties.
Thank you, Gavin. And Councillor Melissa Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone involved. Probably more of a statement and an area of concern for me, and I doubt that there's anything we can do about it, but the $300 million that was first promised a few years ago is somewhat diminished now, and actually dilutes this agreement severely, because $300 million a few years ago is very different to what $300 million is today. So when we talk about no financial adversity to TRC, there actually will be an adverse effect financially, because there is no movement from the state government on the $300 million. And that's been made extremely clear from day one.
If I may, Mr Mayor, the way I choose to answer that question, Councillor, is a very valid question. Without supplying, if we look at the outcomes of this project, is primarily supplying water to those southern towns. The Water Vision document that we have that looks at council solution to supplying water to the southern towns, roughly at about the same time, would be estimated in the next 10 years to be costing council about $148 million to make that happen with work within our bulk water network. As a result of the Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline, the anticipated expenditure for council on supply of its bulk water network as well as supply to the southern towns is estimated at $134 million. So even though the 300 million may not go as far, our 148 would not have gone as far either. So everybody's prices has increased. The cost associated with delivery of those outcomes has increased the same across those options. So while you make a very valid point, 300 million won't stretch as far, the cost to supply and the cost to invest in infrastructure to achieve the same outcomes would also have increased by the same amount since that 300 million has come in.
Councillor Taylor, when the state government announced this near 3 years ago, the number wasn't $300 million. There has been significant movement by the state over this time.
Yes, I realise that, but then it went from 90 million, if I recall correctly, to 300 million. Yes, that's correct. But that 300 million was before the significant increase in supply chain costs. So that's where my question was coming from.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Is anyone else wishing to make any comments? Councillor Summerfield.
Thank you, Chair. I did wait until it went around the room, so if you could bear with me. So number 8 talks about the allocation of water loss risk, which party the water is being transferred for and which party is responsible for maintaining the pipeline. So first question relates to the water losses. So according to another area in the report, it says that water losses through 75 kilometres of the pipeline is to be borne by TRC. That's just written black and white in the report. And yet we're saying here that we're going to negotiate it. So I just wonder how that all works. But then the second part, which party is responsible for maintaining the lines? So who owns the line and who will be maintaining it?
In relation to the water losses, you mentioned earlier, Councillor, that you wanted to ensure that we put our foot forwards as far as what our expectations were. SEQ Water is expecting through negotiations that TRC will take water losses and deal with those, and the resolution firmly says no, we're not going to. So that's the first part of the answer to that question, is that we're using that resolution to say we're not. There's an equitable share of water losses because TRC will be using that pipeline, as I've said earlier, all day, every day. Warwick will be using it a little bit, and sharing the losses that are incurred as a result of any pipeline is fair. As far as ownership and operation of that pipeline and maintenance, it is anticipated that SEQ Water, sorry, not anticipated, SEQ Water will own the infrastructure, will own the pipeline from the reservoirs at Highfields all the way through to the connection for our treatment plants, as well to the connection at SDRC. There's a reservoir to be built just outside of Leslie Dam. They will own and operate that infrastructure. Maintenance will be done by an agreement between SEQ Water and a party that may vie for the maintenance. So it'll be paid for by SEQ Water. They have been open and honest with us that they don't have maintenance crews in this area. They are predominantly based in SEQ. So there's an opportunity there, depending on the conditions of which are put to market for this council, as Mike does with other infrastructure assets on behalf of the state, to maintain that for SEQ Water, or in fact for another third-party contractor to do that on behalf of SEQ. But the pipeline is SEQ Water's pipeline. It is owned, and they will pay for the maintenance of that pipeline.
Thank you for that clarity. I appreciate it. In relation to the us not accepting the water loss, it actually reads in here that it will be negotiated and agreed upon. So we're not in the, and this is what I was getting at earlier, was that, you know, the Southern Downs have articulated quite clearly what their expectations are, whether throughout all of ours, that we're going to negotiate outcomes. And so that brings me to the point of delegations in the report. And the delegations say no new delegations. So could someone elaborate with me, possibly you, CEO Brian, on what that actually means? Because I think delegations in this particular instance, very important that it's clearly defined what those delegations are.
Just which part are you referring to?
In the written report, it talks, as in all of our council reports, it has financial impacts and it has delegations. And our delegations in this particular report says no new delegations. I need to understand what that means.
I have delegation already to implement these kind of agreements. But if council wished to, and this was discussed previously at the last meeting, if you recall, there was some indication that at that point in time, you may recall that council indicated they may wish for each one of those separate agreements to come back before council for that decision. So that was something that was raised, but was never obviously determined at the last meeting, because there was no need to. We never got to that point. But that was an issue. I have the delegated authority to deal with that. If council wishes to deal with that differently, they can specifically make a resolution that requires those to come back. It may slow down the process, but that's a decision for council.
Thank you for that, Brian. I appreciate that. So perhaps it could be that if required, if there was speed involved, that we could call a special meeting to deal with it. If
Absolutely, you could always do that.
Yeah. So that's something I'd like to see if we could, please. Because these are really important negotiations, and that's what I was saying earlier. I fully get the preference to negotiate with the state government rather than directly dictate to them. I get it. But it also means that there's flexibility in there. And so if you're going to have flexibility in there, I think it's important that it comes back to us for final sign-off. Otherwise, we'll end up in a position where something could potentially get signed off that we as councillors disagree with, and then we end up with a little war between us and the organisation, which isn't at all healthy. So I think it would be great, with such an important issue as this, that they all come back to us to be agreed upon, is my view. So going back to the 15 million for the towns, does that cover off on all of our costs, or will we end up with a report back to us down the track saying, look, we thought it would be 15 million, but in actual fact, it's going to be this much? And let's face it, this happens regularly. And given the pressures that are on our budget at this moment, and when I say this moment, I'm talking about the next 5 to 10 years, we've got all these big projects that we're doing. We need to understand today that 15 million will cover off on all of our costs in relation to getting our water to those towns and the water treatment plant at Greenmount.
So councillors, until we have a contract in place and signed off, I can give you little assurances that 15 million will cover. What I can say is that based on the planning assessments and assumptions that have been done through the project, that it's anticipated that this project will be about 14.5 million to do what we want to do, to supply Greenmount, Canberra, Clifton and Nobby. That is the planning estimates. There is, as we do with all projects, put forwards a basis. We've used the best information we can have at that point in time around length of pipe, cost X dollars per metre to put in. This is the size, this is how many metres we need to put in. It's a planning estimate, it's based on the best information at the time, but until we go to market, test the market, depending on what's available and the risks that contractors see, I can't sit here and stand here and suggest to you that it will definitely come in under $15 million. That would be very remiss of me, but what we can say is we've done as much as we can in the short period of time we've had to ensure that the proposed solution fits within the budget that's been allocated by the state.
Thanks, Jake. And the same with the 26 million for Wivenhoe?
We know that Wivenhoe is going to be more expensive than 26 million. Wivenhoe is about 38 million. It's the contribution from the state to Wivenhoe of 26 million. The remaining contribution is anticipated to come from council. Without that contribution, council would be up for the full amount to duplicate and provide those works.
Thank you. And then, of course, the glee about the $45 million, which is wonderful, but it's over 10 years, so it's really not that great in the big scheme of things. 4 million a year. So I just thought I'd mention that. In relation to the smart meters, the 8.5 million that Southern Downs Regional Council are asking for their smart meters, and I know it's a different scheme to ours, but it's irrelevant what scheme it is. It's 8.5 million towards their smart meters. And we haven't mentioned anything about smart meters in here that we could try and also get the bonus of some subsidy for our 20 million plus project for our smart meters. So
based on conversations that we had this morning, there is an alternate recommendation if council wishes that we have it sort of drafted quickly as a secondary item to seek as sort of resolution number 2, that council seeks financial support from the state government relating to provision of a contribution towards funding for the smart water meter program for council.
Thank you. Could we add a dollar value in there, please? Otherwise, they might give us $20. I appreciate that resolution being put forward, by the way, being prepared. But I would like to see some sort of figure in there, whether it be 50% funding or something towards, and that could be the bone that might get me over the line.
We could ask for an equitable funding, maybe a suitable response.
That's like using the word adverse, Jake.
I'm guided by the chamber as far as what they see as a suitable number to put in there. We know how much smart meters is likely to cost this organisation. I would suggest a number between 8 and 10 might be a reasonable number, but I'm not the state government. I don't know whether their grant funding and the situation associated with the state would be looking amenable upon that. But I'd rather say we'll try and seek as much as we can get from the state, and if it's as much as we can get, it's as much as we can get, councillors. I look at the smart meters a little bit. If I was investing $300 million in a pipeline, I'd want to make sure that at the end of the pipeline, the water's being used properly.
And it wasn't leaking.
Exactly. So maybe, I know it's Southern Downs has been very gracious for smart meters, but it is a program that they must put in, whereas we have had the opportunity to make an informed decision that is best for our ratepayers around our adoption of a smart water meter program.
Actually, it's a little bit more than that, because it's actually 17% water loss in our region, which equates to a heck of a lot of money, but also a heck of a lot of water that is lost in the system that could be saved from being pumped from Ivanhoe up to here in the first place. So I think that would be a really valid argument to push for that financial support. It's very similar to Southern Downs, to be honest. When you've got 17%, that's a huge water loss in your system. So what else did I have? I've got one final one that you're just going to love, Mr. Mayor. We might not be so protective of this whole scheme if we had Emu Creek Dam underway. If we'd actually decided, and we still can, we can still agree to do a business case on Emu Creek Dam and actually start the process.
Well, I think there's something happening in respect to the water study that's being done by the state government. And what the outcome is there, I don't know, but it should come out in the not too distant future, whether they believe Emu Creek Dam is appropriate or whether it's not.
Oh, they don't believe in dams, full stop.
Yeah, I know that. I know that. In terms of the resolution in respect to water meters, I think we need to separate that a little bit from what we're doing today. It may be more appropriate if a report of some sort came to us and a motion was moved here that a report of sorts came to us in respect to the amount of money that will cost us, and you know, we go for 50% of that. That would be my mind. Now, in saying that, in a conversation recently with the Mayor of Southern Downs, they found an area where they'd put new water meters in, where there was a 22 megalitre per day loss of water that they were not aware of. You know, so as I said earlier this morning at the previous meeting, you know, water meters, smart meters are absolutely essential and will give us far more water security than we have now.
And
so
it's for that
I don't
reason.
care how it comes forward. I think that we actually need to bring it forward and we need to put some thought into it and seek funding.
I disagree. I think it needs to be here because of the Southern Downs having it in theirs, and I hear what you just said about their 22,000 litres or
22
whatever it was,
megalitres.
megalitres. They mightn't need our pipeline at all. So I understand why they've got it in there, but I also understand that that's a good reason for us to have it in ours as well, when you talk about 17% water loss. So I think it should be here as part of a bargaining chip.
I wouldn't advise that. Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I actually agree it should be there, because we as decision makers around this table have already made the decision to put smart meters in, and we are being proactive to assist with our water security. So why shouldn't we be rewarded instead of financially not rewarded by the state government and being disregarded again when we've been proactive nearly every step of the way? And our community, as I said in the last meeting, has done the hard yards. So why shouldn't we put it in here as part of this resolution? I think it's imperative that we do that and not be discarded again.
Okay. Right, Councillor McMahon, then Councillor McDonald, then Councillor Carl.
Chair, thanks. Look, two of my questions were quite identical to Councillor Summerfield's, not the Emu Creek one, the other two. If I could make a broader statement and then perhaps circle back, but I think if we just zoom out and look at this whole project, we're in a situation where we hold a fair few of the cards, and I control freak. I want us to be in the box seat where we're determining what's going on and what's best for our community here. I feel like that the more this conversation progresses, there are more moving parts, more complementary motions from state or local council, that we are bit by bit losing our place in this whole situation, and that perhaps at some point the carpet will be swept out from under us, and this is what's happening regardless. I think that at worst, our vote may be considered irrelevant, and at best, if the state government can overrule, or not overrule, reword Southern Downs' motion, I see no reason why they couldn't do the same thing to us. So that's the conflicting that's going around in my head, the fact that I feel like we're losing control of this whole situation as the situation progresses. I think the mature approach is to go back to, we represent the people of Toowoomba region. Is there some levers that are going to be good for Toowoomba region? I appreciate Councillor Megan brought up 45 million, and I agree with that. But in our motion, I suppose this is where the questions in line with Councillor Summerfield were exactly the same. We've talked about the Wivenhoe, and roughly 2/3 of that will be funded. And then we've got the Greenmount situation, which is part 3 of our motion. When it says, and I hope I'm not A, doubling up, or B, going into confidential, when it says future treated water pipelines, how long in the future are we talking about? Like, let's look 20 years down the track, and we know how tight budgets are. They're so tight. And we have this pipeline that's been running with Southern Downs, and everything's going rosy, and we're still sitting here with the water treatment at Greenmount saying we're just going to fund the part to Clifton when we get it. Like, how future are we talking here? Is this going to be all done similarly? I just want a bit more confidence in this whole thing.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy if council wants to put a resolution in there, or amend that resolution to say the treated water pipelines are delivered by 2026. But that does lock us, as we've heard this morning, into some complexities around how that has funded. It is an intention of the pipeline that we must build a water treatment plant at Greenmount. We must have a supply to Greenmount as part of the completion of the pipeline, which is slated for 2026. It is intended that the most efficient delivery method of those pipelines be considered, so it may occur in conjunction with the construction of the Southern Pipeline by SEQ, as in the pipes are laid not in the same, or essentially in the same trench, but far enough apart. And I'm looking at my colleague manager, Mr. Phil McEwen there, who is very much ensuring that the assets that SEQ would construct on our behalf would be to our standards. I'm more than at this chamber's disposal if they wish to make recommendations or resolutions that enforce things to happen by certain times, is that will assist water and waste in making sure things happen at those timeframes. However, as one big council, we need to consider a bigger picture. As a ratepayer myself, I am seeking that there is some flexibility there to ensure that the most efficient delivery is considered at a future time for this project.
Yeah, right. Look, I don't think I want to put a 4-year date on it, but something better than the word future. Do you have any advice on meeting in the middle there?
If we wanted to put in prior, within a 15-year window from this year, but I don't know, I'm looking at my financial colleagues here and going, it needs to be considered as the most efficient delivery of that infrastructure and the most efficient use of council's resources is what I would be advocating for as an officer of the organisation, to ensure that flexibility is there, so that it depends on what's occurring at any one point in time.
Given
Sorry. So the priority, as we know, is Clifton and Cambodia. Greenmount and Cambodia. Cambodia is a priority. We will look to deliver that piece of infrastructure. But again, it's got to be efficient, it's got to be done efficiently, it's got to be done cost effectively. Make sure that we're not getting value for money for the ratepayer and making sure that the outcomes are achieved.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I'll let someone else have a talk, but the word future by itself isn't sitting right with me. I think that could be any time from here to Kingdom Come.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. Councillor McDonald, and then Councillor Carl.
Thanks. Oh, thanks very much, Mayor. There's just some more wording going up on the screen there. I'm just trying to keep track of what's happening at the same time. That's perfectly fine. I just had a question for Jake. It was raised earlier in regard to the $15 million, and you answered it beautifully, Jake, in regard to those treatment plants. Now that the proposal is to have the one southern treatment plant, and we've already got in our capital works a new treatment plant at Mount Kynoch. Can you just remind us, and perhaps maybe this is a confidential, maybe not, but can you just remind us, we got the $15 million, we were going to spend similar amounts at that time. We then have a forecast budget to spend in excess of $110 million, let's just say that for the time being, Mount Kynoch, over a 10-year period. So it's in our 10-year capital works program at the moment. Are you confident that that would be pushed out or would not be required? And if so, based on the modelling, what does that look like in 30 years' time?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. I think there is some confusion, or maybe some confusion in that the southern water treatment plant that we talk about is a large southern water treatment plant that will be built or intended to be built in Westbrook to supply Toowoomba. The $15 million is for the Greenmount water treatment plant to supply water to the 4 townships. So the 110, it is anticipated that as a result of this, should council endorse the recommendation to move forward with the pipeline, that the 110 from Mount Kynoch will turn into $65 odd million for the southern water treatment plant. So instead of spending 110, we would look to get some additional life out of Mount Kynoch on the upgrades that are occurring on foot as we speak. That upgrade will last us much longer than anticipated, because we'll be building a new southern water treatment plant to service Toowoomba, which will take demand and provide additional capacity that would have otherwise been used at Mount Kynoch. So we're diversifying our water portfolio to have 2 water treatment plants, and with that we have capacity at one, provides capacity in that one by building a new water treatment plant and diversifying and increasing resilience for Toowoomba across our water network.
Thank you for clarifying that, Jake. Much appreciated. So therefore, redundancy, if you like, or if there's maintenance to be done on the water treatment plant at Mount Kynoch, the one at Westbrook, which would it have the capacity at a reduced rate, obviously, to actually put Mount Kynoch offline, do maintenance, and then do the other?
The detailed planning at this stage is showing there is a window of opportunity there to ensure that when we build the new southern treatment plant, we'll build it to about 50 megalitres a day. Okay. Mount Kynoch will do about 60 megalitres, 57 megalitres a day. So to cater for Toowoomba at 100 megalitres per day, we'll be able to provide, yes, some reduced capacity under extreme restrictions, but we will be trying to connect trunk infrastructure to key locations around the city. One of them is the Gavenbar zone, which has the reservoirs at Postle Street. They have the capacity to service most of Toowoomba from that location. So there is some in-depth details that our planning team are going to be working very hastily on resolving, but there's a window there, Councillor, whereby there's an opportunity to invest in infrastructure and renewals rather than upgrades for existing infrastructure through Toowoomba, and end up with a diversified, resilient water supply network for Toowoomba.
No, it's very good. I appreciate that you've given that information. That's very useful. Would the Westbrook one also service Westbrook, the Westbrook community?
Yes, Councillor. So it will primarily be servicing Westbrook, communities at Glenvale, communities at Charlton, those sort of areas. That's where the initial demand for that treatment plant will be. and we've been in consultation with our planning and development colleagues about the opportunities that may make for Toowoomba.
And so therefore, if I could, Mayor, through you, the second part of the Southern Downs motion is even more important in regard to our program of works not being dictated by Southern Downs' requirement for water. Is that?
That's correct, Councillor.
No, thanks, Jake.
Councillor Carl.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Jake, you may have already answered, but along those lines, am I to understand that, you know, aside from the savings that have been put to us around being involved with this, over running the race ourselves and in future expansion of the Southern network, time limits and indexed, am I to understand there's no time limits on us as part of that Southern pipeline for us to make extensions, or is there, as a consequence, some bring forward costs around this project that, from a timing perspective, that we have to squeeze in and something has to squeeze out around our affordability in the short to medium term?
Through Mr Mayor, Councillor, we have worked with the state to ensure that there are no additional bring forward costs as a result of what we're trying to do with the surrounding infrastructure. So the new Mount Connock water treatment plant was due in 2032. We will anticipate to have the new Southern water treatment plant constructed by 2032. There was a supply options for the TRC Southern pipeline that will line up, or delivery of the water treatment plant at Greenmount, again funded by the state, will align with anticipated timeframes that we were anticipating to spend to supply those townships with water. Okay. We've worked very hard to, and even the upgrade of the Wivenhoe pump station. It was originally anticipated that project would need to occur prior to the completion of the pipeline project, but we've discussed with the state that it's not the pinch point in the infrastructure. There is some capacity in that infrastructure, so we're able to defer that until such time as it's amenable for council. Again, depending on efficiencies of funding and other arrangements to guarantee or make sure that we best utilise the funding that's provided by the state for that project.
Yeah, so we're not disadvantaged by the timing requirements on that funding by the state either.
That's correct, Councillor.
Okay, so just on another point there around the smart meters, if we take a step back, as suggested by some comments, I don't think we've ever been in control of this outcome, given how it was delivered to the Mayor in the beginning, or this whole project. But if you're to take the helicopter view in the state's position of providing water network interregionally, I think personally I would like to see the smart meters added into that equation, because if you view a water network holistically, it would make really logical sense to be able to negotiate some funding to assist us as well, like Southern Downs have put on the table, from an overall network saving, in ensuring that from the bucket, excuse the pun, which happens to be Wivenhoe and other dams, we are best utilising that at the end point of the network and not having losses and pumping every litre uphill in that use and rising energy costs. So I think our bargaining position in presenting our terms to the state should reasonably include smart meters as part of that scenario. Is that a fair?
I would only caution councillors that this has not been something that has been discussed with the state, and that there has not necessarily been, the state hasn't had an opportunity to consider what that might look like in the realms of this project. So rather than maybe making it conditional or appearing to be conditional on support of this project, that we would seek a separate item to ensure that we're working hard and suggesting to the state that the benefits of funding or assisting some funding with a smart metering project.
So, yeah, I respect that view, Jake, but I would dare say they're not about to about face on a delivery of a project when they're this far down the track. I wouldn't like to see us trade away an opportunity at an important gateway such as this and wrap it up in a neat little not even conditional request, which is easily refused, separate to this negotiation. I'm sure there's a way of us wording that. There's plenty of people around with expertise in that could include this as part of it. I would like it, and if, as I say, if we take a step back and holistically view this, water is everyone's resource, and if we're showing initiative as Councillor Melissa has ably put, then let's be rewarded for that. I just think it's, if we want to try and put things in shoeboxes and negotiate after the fact, I think we're trading away our chips, personally.
Councillor McDonald, you indicated a question.
Thanks, Mayor. I actually tend to agree that this is our chance. This is just seeking financial support. It's not saying it's, demanding. It's seeking financial support, but perhaps the wording could be seeks dollar matching financial support to give some clarity around what we're after. I mean, that's it's a confidential report in regard to the smart meetings. I would suggest to what it is, so you wouldn't put a dollar in there at the moment, but to seek dollar matching financial support from the, I can't see that there's any harm in doing it, to be perfectly honest.
Any other comments around the room? Councillor Von Hoff.
Thanks, Mayor. So this is a $300 million project, and yourself and Councillor Megan raised that the state government is contributing $45 million.
That's my understanding.
To Toowoomba Regional Council. So does that mean the remaining $155 million goes to Southern Downs Regional Council?
Significant part would be the building of the pipeline, I'd imagine, of that 300 million. Brian, did you? Yeah, the major capital expense would be the building of the pipeline.
So have we broken down then the percentage that's beneficial for us with that pipeline, so that we meet that last condition of the previous decision of council, that all parties to the transaction achieve an equal financial benefit?
I'd have to refer that question to Jake or the General Manager. I think would be I certainly don't have the figure indicated to me.
I think some of that discussion may best be had in a confidential session, Mr. Mayor.
Why is that? Why is that?
Because we'll go into items of some detail which are not currently in the public domain and are in the attachments in the report.
Okay, if we go into confidential and discuss it and there's not detail in those reports, then I'll raise it once we come back out of confidential, because it won't have been contained in the reports.
Okay, I'll await the advice of those around the table in terms of what you want to do in regard to that. Sorry.
I'm happy to move to go into confidential if we're comfortable to do that. Some of my questions I thought were edging on the air of caution as well, but being they're confidential, but they were answered in a manner that could remain open to the public. So I'm unsure exactly what what could be answered without going to confidential, but given the advice from the General Manager, I'm happy to move to go into confidential.
I have a mover. Is there a seconder? Councillor Shine. Councillor Tomfield?
Nothing, Mr Mayor, you mustn't have been able to see councillor Tim's hand up. He'd had it up for quite a while before.
Oh, well, my apology, Tim. I'm sorry about that, but there are 10 people around the table and I don't see you at the one time sometimes. And it's the moving hand that gets the attention. Okay, those in favour of going into confidential? That's carried. councillors, in view of the discussion, is there a resolution of sorts that we need to have before us?
Mr Mayor, can I just ask one more question?
I can't hear you.
Can I ask another question?
Another question?
Yeah.
Yep, as long as it's not in the confidential
No,
space.
no. I guess it's to either Damien or to Jake. Is there a way that the state can do this on their own where they just totally exclude us?
Councillors, the state is trying, and this is only my opinion as a person, the state has tried very hard to work with us on this project. When I entered or started as an acting manager, the first meeting we had with the state was, this is the pipeline, this is the project, this is what TRC is going to get. And through the work of my team and others in this room, we've managed to work with the state to provide something that does seem beneficial for TRC. I'm not sure that the state will decide to make a unilateral decision such as the one that might be before them if the resolution isn't passed. What is most likely in my opinion, is that the project will be put on hold, delayed, momentum will fall away, and there'll be a grey area, as we have had for the past years, about what we want to invest in and how we want to invest in our network to supply those residents of Clifton, Greenmount, Nobby and Cambodia. It will be under a shadow of concern because the state may choose to make a decision at a time that is convenient for itself but not so convenient for TRC, is my thoughts, and they're only my thoughts. It's not based on any more than relationships we have with the state.
So we can see the long one.
Mr Mayor, the only thing I'd add to that would be that we have negotiated, and I was there for the first 2 years of those negotiations, and they were multiple officers, multiple consultants. I suggest if in answer to Councillor Megan's question, is if the state was to do it by itself, it would be a smaller diameter pipe all the way through, which would remove options for us to augment with a southern water treatment plant, which we know would allow us to prolong the utilisation and take load off the existing Mount Conop, and we know that that would be a better capital outcome than a single water treatment plant to the north of Toowoomba at Mount Conop, and it gives us greater resilience. So I think the opportunity to influence for the betterment and more resilient network and diversification of water treatment plant is the proposition which has been recommended by officers to council to consider.
Councillor Carroll, then Councillor Nancy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I really appreciate an opportunity to speak here, and I think, you know, what I'm saying is quite studied. I can remember when this pipeline was first announced, the way it was announced, and I'd actually like to say to our staff and everyone who's been in that space, thank you very much, because we may not be entirely satisfied with what we've got, but we've got a whole lot better scenario than we would have had the state just ploughed on. Now, some of us have been around this table for a while, some would say too long, but at the end of the day, we've seen a state government that wants, of both colours, that wants to do what it wants to do, and it has every right to be able to do that. And I would urge caution on behalf of councillors, because I think that we have got something that does benefit our community, that we may not have but nobody ever gets everything they want. And I think that the position that we're in now, that has been negotiated by a lot of people that have played their part, and I think it's probably the best that we can hope for. And I think I'd urge my colleagues to support it. Thanks.
Councillor Summerfield, then Councillor Carl.
Thank you, Chair. And it's good to hear staff talking about all the positives in this, but we also need to understand all the negatives as well. I think it's important to have both on the table when we're talking about all of this. Instead of just promoting one side of it, I think it's important that we really understand the whole of it. And the whole of it isn't in this report. The whole of it should also include the 10-year capital works program and the impact that this decision today could have on that. We've all seen some of the figures bandied around today. We need to understand what that's going to do to our 10-year capital works program, and there's nothing about that in here that can project to us what the implications are going to be. We've been talking for some time now about all the money that's going into water and waste, or water, and that it's in the meantime, there's other things not being done in other portfolios, and this will increase that. So we need to understand that if we make this decision today. We need to understand that there's going to be more money going into water and less money going into other areas. And I see Councillor Carroll nodding. She knows what I'm talking about. It's the roads. We need money for roads. We need more than money. We need other strategies for roads as well. But we need money for roads. We need money for all sorts of other things, including the civic building. All these big capital projects we've got staring us down the throat, and we've got to make a decision today, not knowing what that's going to do to our 10-year capital works program. And to me, that's a blind decision to make. So I'm concerned that we don't have enough information. We're talking too much about the positives and that we're not necessarily mentioning the negatives in this as well. We have to get best outcomes for us, but we also have to get best outcomes for the whole region.
Thanks, Councillor Summerfield. Councillor Carl, you were next, and then Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Chair, may I suggest a couple of additional words in point 4 at the bottom of that, the recommendations that say relating to the provision of contribution towards funding for its Water Smart program, smart water meter program, to assist in building a more resilient water network. And the reason why I say that is, if we take a step back from our own patch, water is water, and if we can save it anywhere in the network, whether that's in Southern Downs or here, it means there's more water for higher and better uses, i.e. drinking instead of leaking into the ground or out of the network. I just think it's good for us to be really obvious as to why we're requesting this from an environmentally conscious and being aware that we need to be clear with why we're requesting that of the state. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Carl. Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan.
Mr Mayor, I was just going to move the motion.
Sorry?
Just going to move the motion.
I might just, I think appropriately, given the comments that have been made, Anne-Marie, would you like to make a comment on funding and, oh, yes, yep, I think it's in view of where we are.
Thanks, Mayor. Just to assure councillors, every decision that's made regarding the Capital Works programme will be modelled into council's long-term financial forecast, and the budget can't be adopted without presenting a 10-year plan as part of the budget documents, and we will ensure that our sustainability parameters, which have been agreed to, are adhered to at all times.
I think we know that. I think it's more about the fact that what is going to be pushed out as a result of it. Thanks though, Anne-Marie.
So, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, you're moving the resolution on the before us.
Just before we do that, can I just get clarification of the Ann Avenue of funding, whether we actually need that? Yeah, thanks.
The only thing I'd say is in my very difficult negotiations with the department, they made it very, very clear to me that this funding avenue is exhausted, and when I asked them for exactly what we're asking for here. So my personal view is that ought to be left there. But I'll accept the judgment of the majority. Councillor Shine.
Just a question to Councillor Carl, really. Would he mind if we put after the word resilient and efficient, bearing in mind the reason why apparently the state was interested in Southern Downs adopting that scheme, mainly for efficiency reasons.
Any further comments, Councillor McMahon?
Thanks, Chair. Just circling back, wondering if we could scroll up and if my colleagues would have any issues in 3, adding near future or 10-year time frame or something to that regard. Within the near future, remove what? Or remove future. Okay, that's a better idea. So the word end maybe instead of all that. End. If I don't know if the mover has an issue with that, I just would like a bit more certainty than sometime in the future.
Well, I have reached the stage where I have a mover. Is there a seconder? Councillor Shine. Anyone wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor Harris-Sutherland, would you like to begin discussion, please?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I understand my colleagues' concerns about what comes in and what comes out of the Capital Works program, but I guess that is part of being a leader and making a decision, that we need to have the agility and foresight to think about what's going to be great for our community long term. So yes, there are going to be things that we have to move around, but that's part of the process that always happens. And long term, to my mind, I think that we're getting a really good deal here. And without the, I know it's not pitting councils against councils, but I think some of the communities, and probably Southern Downs, is in a really poor position where we were some time ago. And as I keep saying, the state threw us a lifeline then, they're throwing them a lifeline now, and we've just got to work out what we're going to get that's going to be really good for our community, which is supplying those southern towns with water, which we were always going to do, and this is a way of us piggybacking onto that and getting the best deal for our residents. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Von Hoff, you wish to speak against?
Yes, I do, thanks. This proposal is asking us to stretch an existing system, and it's a system that our residents have paid for. And there's risk that comes with that, and it is an unacceptable risk in my opinion. I can't be satisfied that there's equal financial benefit, and I really ask councillors, given what we've just heard, can you honestly be satisfied that there is equal financial benefit here? We know through the questions that have been asked that Toowoomba Regional Council stands to gain $45 million of a $300 million project. You know, the worst part of my considerations with that, I was made to feel, how dare I ask? How dare I ask for numbers? It shouldn't be controversial for a councillor to ask questions. Furthermore, I cannot see a day in the future where our community is really hurting from drought. And I look around this room and I know that each of us knows the horrors of drought. And I cannot see a day in the future, if this happens and there's a pipeline between Toowoomba Regional Council and Southern Downs Regional Council, where we're suffering with drought and so are they, and we say, sorry folks, we cannot do it. we can't send you water today, and that's kosher. I cannot see that happening. And I don't think any of you can see that happening either. You know what would happen, and that would be overarching political intervention because it's a state of emergency and water needs to flow to the Southern Downs. I know that we want to be neighbourly, but this is not fair to ask this of us. And bigger picture, the state government's job is to sort out water. So from their perspective, their answer in this instance is to stick another straw into the Wivenhoe Cup. How is that a sustainable long-term solution for water security for Southern Downs? Forgetting Toowoomba Regional Council, how is that the solution for Southern Downs? She'll be right, just add another, take some more from Wivenhoe. I really urge us today to reject this and earnestly and in a very push fast forward on moving ahead with infrastructure to our southern townships, to Greenmount, to Cambodia, to Westbrook, so that we can open up development to the south of our community. Do it ourselves. Let us be in control of our destiny and not crab walking away from control, which all of us know has happened in this process. Our duty is to our residents. Our duty isn't to Southern Downs Regional Council, our duty is not to the state government, and our duty isn't to our political inclinations. Our duty is to our residents.
Councillor Shine, you seconded the motion. Do you wish to speak for it?
Yeah, just briefly, Mayor. From my perspective, looking at the broader picture, what the state government has offered was to expend a very considerable amount of money, $300 million, in our region and the region of Southern Downs. It would be irresponsible of us to adopt a position of negativity towards that proposal, providing, of course, that our own water security was assured. And from what I can deduce from the proposition that we're putting up, 1 to 10, as indicated today, any concerns in that regard are satisfied. The state government, in investing in our region, is adding to its initial investment for the Wivenhoe pipeline. That decision was made around about 2009. It was completed, from memory, about 2011. And that was of great assistance to Toowoomba. 2/3 of the costs were paid by the state government and the remaining by way of a loan. They were generous terms, and likewise the proposition put to us today, that we're considering today, is equally generous, and it's in our best interest of our community, in accordance with our duty to our citizens, to accept it, and and with that in mind, I'm happy to second the motion and to vote for it.
Anyone wishing to speak against the motion? Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit I find this a really tough one. The very first line of the motion has in there a safeguard, and that is contingent on formal agreements, so that even if we do agree to this today, if we don't agree with any one of those negotiations, this gets turfed out. So that is a really good safeguard, and I don't know whether you'll realise that, but it is. If we don't agree to any one of those future contracts, which is why I wanted to come back to this room, it's gone. That resolution is gone if we don't agree to all of them. So that to me is a good safeguard. The water meters to me is a nice bone, as I said earlier, but we're lacking information financially, and financially that's the core to what we do in this room, is oversee the finances of this organisation to protect our ratepayers, And we don't know what this is going to do to our capital works program for the next 10 years. We already know all the pressure that's out there. We already know all those big projects. We were talking about them just this morning. We know the pressures, but we don't know what this is going to do to those already big pressures. So I'm going to be voting against this based purely on the fact that we haven't been given enough information to make a clear decision, knowing what that's going to do to our capital works program for the next 10 years. And I think everyone should think really seriously about that, because that's our job. That's what we do, oversee the finances of this organisation. And we don't have the detail in there, in this report. One of the details was pointed out earlier, which is why we went into closed session, but we do not know what it's going to do to our capital works program. And that alone is why I am not voting for this today.
Thank you, Councillor Summerfield. Is there a speaker for the motion? Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I totally agree. This is a really big decision for council, and until we had a very good discussion today, I was pretty well on the fence, I have to say, with a lot of the things that came up. I guess I come back to make the decision, and we're making on behalf of the community. And if we look at our 10-year capital works program, where we've already budgeted in a new water treatment plant at over $110 million, we'll be receiving an amount to support the townships, of which is an equal amount, and the around about the $65 million mark of that 112 or 115 that's already budgeted for in the 10-year capital works will go to service and actually safeguard our community with another southern pipeline to Westbrook, which will not only safeguard Toowoomba up to something like 50 megalitres a day, of which we use between 33 to 35 megalitres a day at the moment. So that's a safeguard, and this is what's been going on in my mind since the last meeting, as to what is the real benefit for our community. So water security is arguably our number one, and to have a redundancy built into this this program that can be supported by activating arguably a future growth area, not arguably, it is a future growth area of Westbrook and surrounds. That was good information today, and probably was explained better today than I'd understood it in the past. So on the balance of that, knowing that we have funding in the 10-year capital works, albeit that's assessed each time, and let's cast our minds back 10 years ago, you wouldn't dream of even thinking about what we've got in our 10-year capital works program now. So it's a real challenge for us, there's no doubt about it. But I think on balance, and given the financials that have been scrutinised by AEC and gone through with a fine-tooth comb, I do think that over 10 years there's a variance or a benefit to for our residents to complete all of those projects of around about $10 to $15 million. Now, to me, that's a benefit for our community. So, on the balance, and taking in all the conversations that we've had, I do think this is, a redundancy, a backup supply, assist our Toowoomba growth plan. On the balance of that, and we end up after 10 years in front, on today's figures, in front by about $10 to $15 million. I think that's, to me, that's enough for me to support the motion.
Thanks, Councillor McDonald. A speaker against? There's not a speaker against. Can I, and before you do say that, I'll certainly would like to say a few things, having been at the table when the Wivenhoe pipeline was considered, and I don't think the council today had anywhere near the input that we're having, nowhere near it. And don't forget that part of the funding came out of a $20-odd million grant that had been given to Gumbunji and the Rosalie Shire. And there were a number of things, so it was completely different to this. I think if you weigh the positives, subtract the negatives, I'm very happy to support this motion. Back to you to sum up, please, Councillor O'Hara Sullivan.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think I said mostly what I wanted to say, but I did want to respond to Councillor Von Hoff's argument that Councillor Shine and I have moved this just despite our political inclinations. I am offended by that.
Excuse
I
me,
truly am
point of
offended by
order,
that.
point of order. I did not say that you and Councillor Shine had moved this because of your political inclinations. Point of order, I asked Councillor O'Hara Sullivan to withdraw that comment.
I'd like to see it replayed on the tape because it
You
was
will not
something to
withdraw?
do with- I'll withdraw it given that you've asked me to.
I just, through you, Chair, is it a withdrawal or not?
She said that you will withdraw it.
Thank you.
So the state government has said to lots of communities that they will not let someone run out of water, and they've said that to us, and now they've said it to Southern Downs. So the Department of Regional Development, Manufacturing and Water was charged with negotiating with the two councils to achieve this. We set out some principles, of which Councillor McDonald has just said, about water security and all the others. And now they've come back with this arrangement, which has been true to that. They have done what we asked them to do. And now we're changing the goalposts. We're saying, no, that's not what we want. We want smart water meters, and we want, different things. We want to know what's going to come in and out of the Capital Works program before we vote for this. I think we're not playing by the rules. We're not being fair. We've asked them to do something. They've done it. We've brought it back. We've got it here before us. It's good for the community long term by us being agile, and most importantly, we're going to have that economic benefit from having. We know that our growth plan is going to go to the south, so that is why I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor O'Hara Sullivan. That ends the debate. We'll now take the vote. The resolution is before you. Does anyone want me to read out the resolution? I think you've probably seen it enough, haven't you? State Government and Southern Downs Regional Council be advised accordingly that each formal agreement from a regional council is required to enter into in accordance with 1 above be considered by approval for approval by resolution of council, that council seek a dollar matching financial support from the state government relating to the provision of the contribution towards funding for its smart water meter program to assist in building a more resilient and efficient water network.
Mr Mayor, if I could suggest that number 2 goes down to be number 4 and number 3 and 4 go up to be 2 and 3, please.
Mover and seconder comfortable with that?
Thank you.
Okay. Councillors, I'll ask you to vote. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In favour of the resolution? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Councillor Cole and Councillor Taylor. 7. Those against? 4 against. You no doubt wish to have your votes recorded? Well, councillors, that ends the meeting. Thank you very much. It's been a long and not a normal meeting with a certain amount of passion, but the council has come to a decision. Can I take this opportunity of thanking our visiting advisors who are here, Michael and Claire, thank you very much. Gavin, of course, is now gone, but particularly to our staff. This has been a long and a difficult journey, whether it be for our people in water, whether it be for some of our infrastructure people, but particularly the decisions that have to be made around finance. And Anne-Marie, thank you very much for your contribution. Damien, thank you very much. Jake, for the work that you've done, and everybody who's here. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much. And with that, I will close the meeting.